You're listening to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, John Wood Jr. Okay, so here we are, and I am joined by two of my favorite sisters, two individuals who I very much appreciate and admire, Miss Kira Davis and Miss Dominique DiPrima. And very short introductions for you both, just to show you guys I did a little bit of homework. Kira Davis is the editor-at-large for Red State, conservative activist, host of the podcast Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. Dominique DiPrima is the host and producer of The Front Page, a very popular morning radio show on KJLH 102.3 in Los Angeles. She's a well-respected community activist and was previously the co-host of the Steve Harvey Morning Show. Kira, Dominique, welcome to the Braver Angels podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
100%. Okay, cool. So let's jump into some stuff here. Now, first of all, let me say I was interested in having you two together because, for one, you're both individuals who, in my experience, listening to, and of course, Dominique, I've been on your show a few times. You two both bring a lot of passion and insight to your perspectives, but you're also each willing to sort of create space for other voices to show up in the conversation and be heard, right? And so at Brave Angels, that's a big part of sort of how we operate. And for myself, and I'm a person who's interested in sort of bridging perspectives within the Black community in particular, to me, I feel like that's what needs to happen if we're going to get a holistic sort of picture of what the future for Black America can look like, and to sort of represent to, you know, America broadly, I think, just kind of the spectrum of attitudes. We're not a monolith, right? And so to show that diversity, I think, is always something I want to take kind of the opportunity to do. And so just to jump in, Dominique, starting with yourself, you're known as a passionate and progressive voice, right? In politics, with respect to culture and all sorts of things. How did you come out? First of all, how would you describe your politics and how did you come to them? What in your life and in your work has brought you to where you are today?
I would describe myself as a leading edge progressive, not sort of the generic, problememization of the term as it now sort of exists, but an actual progressive who believes in left-leaning politics that are moving our country forward, not backward, but forward. I've come to that, I've been born into a family of activists, but I'm not one that automatically believes what her parents believe. My beliefs are actually a little different than my parents. They are probably more radical in some ways than I am, but I think in some ways I am pragmatic. I feel that, through my education, through my practical experience, as a woman of color in this country, as a media professional who has bumped into all of the, roadblocks and opportunities that are afforded us along the way, and as a daughter of activists who seeks to carry on a legacy of civil rights progress in this country as a Baraka, as well as a DiPrima. My father is a Mary Baraka, and I'm very, very proud of that. I feel like...
and Mary Baraka was an activist and a poet too, correct?
Poet, playwright, founder of the Black arts movement in the United States, and someone who has been mischaracterized consistently by the press. But, to me, it's an honor to be a Baraka, to be a DiPrima, and to stand on the shoulders of Dr. King and Malcolm X, and, Ida B. Wells, and all of those who came before.
Indeed. And Kira, same question to you. So you're a visible and a recognizable voice as not just an African-American commentator, but somebody who has a presence within the conservative movement, and somebody who I think speaks to audiences across a bit of a spectrum of experiences. How did you come to be who you are in the landscape of cultural and political conversation?
Well, I'm a lot like Dominique. I have parents who are activists. My parents were like straight up hippies and like total just godless atheists, all of the cliches. My dad met my mom while he was traveling and playing guitar barefoot in youth hostels in the 70s to get by. So we're that cliche of a family. My mom to this day still stands outside her her legislature with signs like mad about senior housing or whatever it is now. So I come by that passion, honestly. But also, like Dominique, my values are a lot different than my parents. So my parents are pretty liberal and they're atheists, and I'm a Christian, and I'm definitely conservative. I have a background in the arts. I'm an actor, and that's what I do by trade. But I retired to raise my family about 12 or 13 years ago. I just wanted to stay home with my kids. And, but I couldn't only do that. So I decided, well, what could I do that would feel like an outlet for me, but still allow me to be home with my kids? And the other thing I always liked was politics. I mean, I was raised in a very passionate household. We always had political discussions. We were always talking. Oh, there's always, and even to this day, a back and forth about what we believe. And we all disagree passionately, and it's fine, like, it's not an issue in our family. So I decided, well, it's free to start a blog. I'll just start a blog and I'll write down what I think about politics. And maybe someday someone will pay me to tell them what I think. And this is a great country. Amazingly, eventually I tricked people into paying me to tell them what I think. So that's what I do now. I work for redstate.com, but I'm also a freelancer, and I do a lot of just, I'm really self-employed. My goal is just to be a voice in the conversation, and not necessarily, people do characterize me as a conservative activist. I don't necessarily consider myself an activist, and certainly not a conservative activist, because I'm not even sure what that means. But I definitely have passions, and I'm very, and have always been very passionate about justice. So justice and grace are big themes in my life. So they play into what I do. I used to be, just to a couple more points on who I am. I used to be quite liberal, a faithful Democrat voter. My views started changing when I started serving our communities. I got married and moved to Gary, Indiana with my husband, who was born and raised there. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. And I got to see how all the policies I had always supported, I got to see how they work up close. And then I was starting to have second thoughts about how they worked, and how this help was affecting the African-American community, the Black community. So that's really around the time when my views started to change. I don't mind labels. They serve a purpose, but I don't really like labels, because I think they get in the way of what is just actual intention.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think that maybe one thing that maybe all three of us have in common is that folks will affix a label to you, right? Sort of like somebody puts a hat on you that doesn't quite fit, right? And so then you kind of got to tussle with it a little bit and say, well, this is actually the way this actually kind of fits on me, right? So it's one of the limits of the way we do politics. We're always trying to brand each other, I suppose. And so, okay, but that's why I wanted to hear from you guys in your own words, just who you really are and why you think the way you do. So I want to talk a little bit about politics in the Black community, the spectrum of perspectives, and also how we sort of the movement for equal justice, the movement for equal opportunity, the larger arc of the Black experience. I want to know how you guys see the path forward for Black America in its kind of like most, in its most productive light. But to sort of on-ramp into this, Kira, I want to read a quote from you, because you said something pretty interesting, I thought, about Candace Owens. And I don't want to make this whole conversation about Candace, because obviously there's a lot of direction to be gone there. But you're saying here, in describing your own views on a podcast I saw you on, you said, I've always had an idea that Black Americans can have more access to prosperity, more access to success, education, the American dream, by diverting off this path we've been following the last 60, 70 years, voting the same way with no results. And I believe that conservative values have the ability to provide prosperity. But with respect to Candace Owens, you said that your problem with Candace's quotes, that not so much some of the things that she says, but that she quotes, leads with tearing Black people down instead of saying, I'm listening, I'm hearing a solution, and here are my points. This question is for both of you, whether it's with respect to Black conservatives on one hand, Black progressives on the other hand. Is there a way in which we tend to tear each other down from between the different political camps that's not constructive? Or is it the case that maybe we just don't talk enough, I guess, to be able to really learn and benefit from each other's points of view? So Kira, I'll go to you first, and then Dominique, follow up with you.
I don't know. Can I ask you a question? I'm just interested why you brought up that Candace Owens quote. Like, what was interesting about it to you?
Well,
that we disagree, that I disagree with her, or that even though we're in the same camp, or?
Yeah, it's the fact that on the one hand, you're saying you see value in the substance of some of what she says, but that on the other hand, you're critical of the way she goes about saying it.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I frequently find myself in the position of saying, okay, I agree with what I hear a lot of folks saying within the Black community, left and right, on various things, right? But what pains me is the fact that we are so committed, and this isn't just Black people, this is just American politics in general. But within the context of the Black community, we can be so committed to trying to paint certain folks as either kind of selling out as Uncle Tom's on the one hand, or as being a part of the Democratic plantation on the other hand, that we don't always get to the point of having the most kind of honest and productive conversation. So that's what I'm getting at.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, thanks. Well, I think in respect to your question and how it relates to the things that I've said about Candace, I think she's a great example of what I was talking about. This idea that there are conversations to be had and then there are bludgeons to be wielded. So I'll use an example. The example that's very important to me and the type of work that I do and advocate for is the number of Black children who are born into single parent homes. That is important to me because I understand the statistics of prosperity, right? Like you have a higher chance, I think it's like already you're at 50% higher chance if you're born into a household with two parents that are married, and then it jumps even higher than that if both of them have graduated from high school. And those are very high bars to set, but we can see in real time the results of those statistics in the Black community. So when I talk about those things, I talk about them as things like, I'd like to talk about solutions. I'd like to talk about why it is important that we have like a solid family structure for our Black children, or support for those that don't have that structure, and how we can supplement and fill in those gaps. I give you that number because I want to change that number. Candace gives you that number because she wants to bludgeon you with that number. And I don't think that's helpful. So I agree that a lot of our divide is that we're not talking, but one of the reasons that we're not talking side to side is because we have these outsized ideas about what the other side is. And so when it comes to Candace Owens, that was my complaint. Like, she can say whatever she wants. She's doing her thing. She's making her money. Like, do whatever you want. I don't care. But when you are being asked to represent me, and I didn't ask for that, you make it harder for the other side to like come to the table with me and sit down and say, I know what she said, and it's red meat and it's clickbait and all that, but there are real issues under the true part of what she said that we really need to tackle and get into. And I think if we have an open dialogue, we could get to it. But if people like Candace get to be the face of this, then I fear we never get to the open dialogue.
By the way, let me just say, Candace, if you happen to hear this podcast, you are more than welcome to join us as a guest on the Braver Angels podcast. Maybe we can get you on the mic with Kira and Dominique sometime.
I'm only a guest, Candace. Don't be afraid. So I don't run the show. You can come on the show.
No worries. Come on in. The water is warm, Candace. Water is warm. But I appreciate.
She's a big girl. She's a big girl.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Kira. And Dominique, I've been on your show a number of times. And of course, having been on your show, I know that one thing you are not famous for is going easy on your guests. On the other hand, though, you always have engaged me and I think other folks coming from different points of view in a way that is intellectually honest and inviting of a productive conversation. And I found a quote here from you in a conversation you had with Cheryl Lee Ralph not too long ago, where she asked you about dealing with people with different points of view who disagree with you. And you said, quote, it's important to do that. You said, quote, it's important because I learned from people that disagree with me. Either I fortify my position by countering their argument, or I say, you know what, they've got a point. Let me think about that. My question here is just, picking up off of what Kira was just saying here, what we were just talking about, as it pertains to the state of the conversation in Black America in general. Do we have as a norm sort of the productive conversation crossing over the spectrum of perspectives in Black America that can sort of maximize our ability to make progress? Or do you think that there's ways in which communication has broken down in certain parts of, between certain factions of the community that maybe need to be built up again? How do you land on that?
Well, I think it's interesting that Kira started the conversation talking about how she had dialogue at home where they disagreed and they agreed. That was my family too. Like, we still to this day don't agree on a lot of things, and we will yell at each other and all kinds of stuff. And it's all good. We're, nobody's brokenhearted. Nobody's not talking anymore. And I really think that's foundational. I grew up that way. Kira grew up that way, and I think that is super, super key. People say, oh, well, you push your viewpoint. Yeah, well, it's my radio show. But I'm one of those people that also allows other voices. And one of the reasons that I push my viewpoint is because I have voices from the right, and that would never be allowed on most, right-wing or what we call mainstream, that are actually right-wing shows all over the media. So I do think dialogue is important. And
now Dominique says that as a why did you say it up top as a forward thinking progressive?
I say leading edge, progressive.
As a leading edge progressive.
Yeah, I do.
Because most of our right wing listeners or conservative listeners would say mainstream media is right wing. What does she mean by that? But anyway,
because for me, the metric is so skewed in the United States. We say we have left, right, and center, but what we're calling left is really the center. And while that has started to shift a little bit with Bernie Sanders and that whole, squad, model, in reality, compared to the rest of the world, our left is center and our right is way, way, way right. So, that's just my perspective. And I think if you look at it globally, it's accurate. But my point is, I think you're right. I think we tend to attack each other in terms of character. I think, the situation with Kamala Harris is a perfect example. I am a progressive. She was not my first choice. I wholeheartedly support her. She's clearly qualified. And I feel like we are very quick to accept, a Bernie Sanders or a Donald Trump with all their bumps and bruises, mistakes and background. We're like, well, I'm behind him. But if it's another African-American, we are going to make them go through hoops. And I think we are harder on each other than we are on other communities. I know that the political discourse in this country is very divided and very vituperative right now. But I do think that as African Americans, we're raised as crabs in a barrel. We still are fighting off the psychological legacy of being enslaved in this nation. And we are trained to attack each other like pit bulls in some kind of ring. And I think that is something we have to deprogram ourselves from doing. Why should we be harder on each other than we are on anyone else? And why wouldn't we listen to each other? Half the time when I'm doing battle, sword fighting with someone who I disagree with, I'm still hearing them. And when I go home, I'm going to process that. And I'm going to look at it through a fact-based lens to see if there's anything of use to me. I am independent-minded. I'll say I'm a leading edge progressive, but I'm always going to think outside the box. I'm never just going to go along with the party line. I'm going to put it through the common sense test. And if it doesn't make sense, I don't care if you're Joe Biden or Che Guevara or Donald Trump and, the entire Thomas Jefferson and founding fathers. If it doesn't smell right, I'm not going to go along with it. And lastly, I would say, this is why I think you're a bit of a black unicorn, John, because you are a conservative who is fact-based and willing to listen and willing to fight back. That's fine. But so many times when I'm on with conservative pundits, especially African-American ones, they just make up stuff. And they're just like throwing around crazy things that sound good. And I just can't respect that. But I think for us to come to the table for real change, we're going to have to be fact-based, evidence-based, and open-minded, and stop just tearing each other down just because, because that's what we're trained to do.
It's so funny, John. It's so funny that to listen to Dominique talk, like everything she's saying, I'm like, yes, but like opposite, right? So I feel the same way about the media, right? But to me, the left is like whoa, slow down. And like to me, and then people like me are the center. There's far right, of course, but it's all perspective is everything, right? And then the other thing that she said that I'm like, yes, I can't stand it when I get a pundit on my show who is just like talking. That's what my podcast, Just Listen to Yourself, is about. It's about critical thinking and actually listening to what you're saying. Because sometimes you're not always saying what you think you are when you break down those talking points. And we don't do that enough. So I hate it when I get a guest and it's just talking points, but there's no thought behind them and really no facts. But I get those on the left wing side, right? Like that's how I look at my left wing guests. And I'm just like thinking about how interesting it is that we don't understand how much perspective plays a part in our worldview. And that's not to say that understanding someone else's perspective means your worldview changes. But if you can understand, if you can get that the whole world doesn't see things the way you see them. Everything isn't as clear to you as you imagine it to be for someone else. For someone else, their clarity looks differently, you know? But that doesn't mean that you can't have a productive conversation, as Dominique said, where she grew up in a house, folks yelling at each other, you know, but they all still, as far as I know, they're all still family, you know, and it's the same way with us. We haven't divorced each other because we have heated arguments or disagreements, and we all understand that our worldview is very different. My worldview is extremely different from my parents because I have faith. You know, I'm a Christian. I have like a religious tether. So we view the world and all of the craziness that goes on with it through very different lenses. And I think if we can learn how to accept that about each other and not be automatically offended, like instead of me going, oh my gosh, Dominique is so dumb. Why can't she just see it from me? You know, how can she say that? It's this way over here. Instead of me saying that, it's like, yeah, I get that. I totally get that. Only on my side, it looks like in the mirror. It looks like the reverse. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and then we don't have to resort to like death threats or we can, this is why I think we need more critical thinking, because when you feel confident in your point, in your view, and you feel very confident about what you believe, you don't feel insecure in an argument or a conversation. So you don't need to bludgeon the other person to death and make them believe what you believe. You can look at it as an interesting discussion, an exchange of ideas, and then move on with your life.
Well, and the key word that you just said is critical thinking. Okay, 2 words. But I think that's not taught enough in schools. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have an uninformed electorate that goes for things that make zero sense. And I think it's one of the reasons we do what you're calling bludgeoning. And by the way, that doesn't work. It may score you points on social media. You may be able to go around and beat your chest and say, wow, I yelled at Dominique. But did you change anyone's mind? I doubt it.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and this is why empathy matters, really. I mean, you know, there's an old, there's a quote that I think I hear attributed to Jack Kemp that goes something along the lines of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. And by the way, Dominique, I very much appreciate the unicorn compliment. Of course, Kira, that's one of those compliments that'll get me into trouble. So let me just say there are many sharp, fact-based conservatives, and I can introduce you to some who are willing to sit down and have a rational conversation.
Bring them on, John. Bring them on.
But to you and Kira's point, though, I do think that the culture of politics that we have tends to elevate people who lean into emotional talking points as opposed to that kind of reasoned, empathetic discourse that we're trying to model because there's a market for it, right?
But can't you be emotional and fact-based? I am.
Of course. Well, here's the thing. I'm emotional. This is the point I'm trying to make. We are all driven by our feelings, right? We are all driven by an internal reality from which our passion comes. I mean, you can't, on the one hand, say you care about issues and not have emotions attached to them. But on the other hand, we can be cynical and exploit or manipulate, you know, the feelings we know people have to get them to feel a certain type of cynicism or hatred towards one group or the other on the basis of whatever our political interests are, without using that ability to connect, to open people's minds to what some greater vision of the truth might be, right? And so I know that there are probably people listening to us now who are eager to hear what you guys think of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I promise you, folks, we're going to get to that point in just a second here. But I love the spirit of the conversation because I think the three of us are all speaking from the vantage point of having a common kind of commitment to the well-being of humanity in general, Americans in general. And we also share this African-American context, this Black cultural context, right? And I'm curious to know, let me say something about me as a unicorn, since you called me that, Dominique. I sometimes refer to myself as a social justice conservative. And what do I mean by that? Kira, when I hear you talk about the values of family and religious faith and tradition and these sorts of anchors of community progress, that resonates very deeply with me, because I tend to think that there is reason for traditions. There is reasons why certain values and cultural and ethical teachings survive over time. And I think that they do provide an anchor for family, and that family sort of provides an anchor for community. And these are things that you hear conservatives talk a lot about. On the other hand, one of the areas in which I connect with a lot of folks whose politics seem different from mine, but folks on the left who have something of a focus on systemic reform and confronting inequities in structures, is in the fact that I see African-American history, even in the present moment, as having grown out of a long kind of history in which systems have been set up in an unequal fashion. And while cultural responsibility matters so much, personal responsibility, so on and so forth, it's hard to ignore the connection between the past and the present, right? And so what I want to explore with you guys very quickly, I asked a little bit about your politics to start off with, but how would you guys articulate kind of your own philosophy for the progress of the Black community in the current day? Is it focused more on one of those things or the other, or is there a way in which, however you would label your perspectives, is there a way in which you look at both systems and culture, or however you want to term it, as being relevant to what progress for the community looks like? And so, Dominique, we'll start with you here, and Kira, jump to you next. But what is your vision in terms of an agenda suitable to the progress of the community?
Well, a couple things about that. First of all, I think typically we always hear this characterized by, well, often, let me say, by conservatives, that we've made no progress working with Democratic administrations. And that's absolutely not true. I mean, we have the right to vote. We can sit at your lunch counter. We've seen progress in many areas as far as our homeownership, prosperity. Is it where it should be? Of course not. But have we made no progress? Absolutely. That is demonstrably not true. I think that personal responsibility and cultural mores are important. But I think this is the first time in American history, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the anti-racist movement, with these marches in these streets, not just in the United States, but worldwide, that we are seeing the concept of systemic racism and unconscious bias addressed in a serious way. For my adult life, they've always been, dismissed, ridiculed, and considered like some far extreme talking point. Now we're looking at the data, and the data shows that there is racism embedded, baked in to our educational, our reform, incarceration system, to our financial systems. And the only way to change that is to go in and fix it. It's not going to fix itself. And I think because of the awakening, the consciousness raising that we have seen, and where people are starting to understand these concepts cerebrally and from a policy perspective, that has to be the priority right now, because that's the moment we're in, where we have the opportunity to see some real change in systems. And honestly, I think as policies and systems change and we are able to ferret out that systematized racism, you will see greater progress, economically, which is something you hear conservatives talk a lot about. And economic opportunity brings much stability to family structures. I mean, a lot of the tearing down of the family that we've seen has been with the exodus of jobs from our community, and the flooding of our community with drugs, such as what we saw from the CIA bringing crack into the community in the 80s. So many of these things have undermined our families, and not just the African-American community. Look at the impact of the opioid crisis on, the sort of general society of America. These things have real impacts. And as we go towards a justice model and look at policies that reverse systematized racism, sexism, and inequity, we will see the kind of progress in the social issues that we all desire.
So Kira, Dominique just gave sort of a comprehensive overview of her philosophy and a reading of history, certain claims with respect to history and how it ties into her analysis of the problems facing Black America today. What is your perspective in terms of what sort of agenda is most conducive to the progress of the Black community?
No one ever likes my solutions because they're because they're not rooted in government. And this is where I always get stuck on this issue, because I know there's a reason why Black America doesn't trust our government. Our government was the one that instituted slavery. Our government is in control of the police. Our government is the one that gave us Jim Crow. Government's giving us all this stuff. I don't really feel comfortable with looking to government to fix it. And I don't tend to believe that government fixes things. I tend to believe it just adds more red tape, and it makes it more difficult. And then sometimes we end up codifying discrimination when we mean to fix it. So that can be an issue as well. But we do agree. I did an episode on my podcast on systemic racism recently. I asked, is it real? Because a lot of my listeners are conservatives, and a lot of people will tell you it's not real. So I made the case. I always take up a question and then I make my case on the question. I made the case that it is real, but it doesn't look like what I think most people in media would say it looks like. And the answer isn't what most people would say it is, which is to kind of tear down what the current structure of government and rebuild it in the image of something we've never seen before. That's not, I don't think we get to a place where we're represented and we have the political capital in government if we don't shut off the spigot at the other end. So it's all well and good to talk about being represented in Congress or being represented in your city council or your school board or at that, in that company. But you first got to get kids who get out of those schools that are failing, who grow up with the notion that these are paths that they can take, and who grow up with those desires. But we're even struggling with getting kids out of elementary school. Do you know what I mean? We're not raising business owners. We're not raising politicians. We're not raising influencers, not the way other cultures do right now. And a lot of that has to do with things like, if you want to ask me about systemic racism, our public schools are a great example of systemic racism, where Black kids are trapped in failing areas, and we ask for more money and we get more money, and nothing ever changes. Nothing's ever changed for the last umpteen years since Brown v. Board of Education. Yet here we are still. What if we gave Black parents the choice? What if we put that money on that kid's head and said, you choose what school is best for your kid? And if it's that white school over there in the suburbs where they get to do STEM programs, then screw anybody who says you're not allowed to go there. You take your kid and you put them there, because that's where the opportunity is. Instead of waiting for all of these folks in government to feel kindly towards us to fix our schools, which I'm not even sure they really want to do. That is an area where our public school system is literally set up to disadvantage Black students, particularly Black male students. So there are issues where we can talk about justice. I don't like the word social justice. I think that separates it from God's justice. I think there's one justice. I don't think God has here's my justice tier and here's my social justice tier. It's all one. And my understanding of God's justice is that every human being is valuable and created in his image and has the ability to be loved and to love, and therefore is important and deserving of respect and empathy. So the question is, how do we in the affairs of man make that work for us? And we all live in different societies and we have different governments, country to country, but we're talking about our government. Our system of government. And I think one of the ways that we change the level of influence that Black Americans have in this country is fighting the system, but we got to turn off the tap. We got to turn off this flow of this prison, this school to prison pipeline, this idea that we're not allowed to have our children be born. I mean, systemic racism, Planned Parenthood was begun by Margaret Sanger, whose very notion was that, well, we need to depress the Black population because they're a burden. Now, this is a fact, so much so that the Manhattan Planned Parenthood took her name off their building last month because they recognize her problematic history. And we can say that the organization has changed, but we're missing about 22 million Black lives from Roe v. Wade to today. So imagine how much different this country would look with an extra 22 million people in it. And so to me, it seems like, wow, that systemic mission has been really successful. So there are ways that we can talk about turning off the spigot at the other end, so we get to be those people who want to own the businesses and want to serve in government and want to run our cities and our schools. And
Right. There's a lot there. And Dominique, I get the sense that you might want to respond to some of it. But I want to ask, Dominique, I want to ask you sort of a conservative leaning question. Kira, I want to follow with sort of a progressive leaning question for you. But to start with Dominique, and this will, I think, tie into sort of what's arcing over Kira's analysis here. Dominique, are there limits in terms of the sort of progress that we can make as a people through activism and through structural reform? Conservatives tend to come from the vantage point of saying that, look, there's only so much good that government can do, or only so much good we can do for ourselves by trying to change government or wait on, powerful politicians to come rescue us. Is there any truth to that claim? And if so, where do you see the truth, and where do you see the fallacy?
The whole thing is a straw man argument. It was never a choice between government or personal responsibility, government or the people, the community, the individual making change. It has to happen on every level simultaneously. We're not so simple that we have to just fix our schools before we can fix systemic racism in government or anywhere else. The fact of the matter, most of the problem with our schools has to do with the fact of the way our tax structure is, so that wealthy communities, schools get more money than poorer communities, Black or otherwise. That can be fixed, and that can be fixed by government. What is government? Government is people. I mean, so you can run for office. I love the way a lot of conservatives, and the talking points do sound much better when they're fact-based and coming from a thoughtful, a smart person like Kira, but they're still the talking points. I mean, so school vouchers are the answer. So we should all go to the schools that have the resources, instead of making sure that every school rises to a level where the kids there, whether they're Black, white, Asian, or whatever else, low income or whatever, are getting the level of education that they deserve. I don't think so. Of course, as a parent, you're going to do whatever you have to do to get your child the best education. And I think a lot of Black parents are doing that. My peers are. I'm a mommy. And, I have lots and lots of friends that jump through all kinds of hoops to make sure their children are ready to lead in whatever area they choose to do so. But I feel like, that's a false dichotomy. And so many times, it's popular to say, oh, government is bad. We hate government. But guess what? I didn't say that, though,
Dominique. I don't think that's fair.
I let you go on your whole rant.
I know. But
you said government is not the answer.
About facts. I didn't say that. I didn't say I hate government. That's all. You didn't say that, but it's often said, and you did say government is not the answer. But you said government is not the answer, and you were very clear that we need to move away from that. And what I'm saying is, a lot of the conservatives who like to say that depend on government if their house is on fire, to come and put out that fire. They depend on our roads and highways to be taken care of and maintained by the government. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic where government should be playing the role that it's meant to play, which is taking care of the common good. This is not, some Uncle Sam is not our rich uncle. Uncle Sam is us. That's our money. And when you talk about the problems within the institution of government, yeah, they're there. And just like what you said about Planned Parenthood, absolutely. Margaret Sanger is a eugenicist. So George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Do we throw out the whole United States of America, or do we amend our Constitution, take down Confederate statues, and move towards the promise of the greatness of our Constitution, the promise of America and everything she is and can be? This is why, I don't understand, or I reject this idea that conservatives are the patriots. I feel that I am the ultimate patriot. I put my ability to earn a living and everything I've got on the line
for my country. I love my country. I believe in my Constitution, and I believe government at its best. No, it doesn't have to be invasive, but yes, it's supposed to take care of the people, the common good. Just like the post office. The post office is not a business. It's a service that's put there to assist the people so that our government can function, so that elderly people can get medicine. Is that ever going to be a profitable business? I doubt it. Bring a letter out to the Ozarks or out in the sticks somewhere? Maybe not. But it's part of what makes America great. Yes, I said it. Makes America great. We offer services. We offer support. And this is something that we all pay into. It's not some sugar daddy. It's all of us who pay our taxes that are funding these schools, that are sending out stimulus checks. Even if they have Trump's name on them, that's your money that you're getting back. And we are supposed to have good roads. We are supposed to have mail service. We are not a banana republic. We are a strong superpower. We are an incredible democracy, and we don't need to shrink. We need to continue to do what we've done well, which is provide the best of what can be to our people. Now, that has to happen for all Americans. And this idea that somehow if you're not white, you're not truly American, or if you're not conservative, you're not a patriot. Well, we need to move beyond that, because clearly that's not justice. Now, you say there's only one justice, it's God's justice, but in America, we have the right to freedom of religion or freedom from religion. So some people may not see it as God's justice, but nevertheless, they still deserve justice nonetheless, because that is part of our great American system.
And I'm guessing that we have common ground on that point. Kira, I want to ask you a quick question. Hopefully we can take a couple of minutes to hit politics. But Kira, then this is sort of the inverse of the question I asked Dominique, but is it possible to underestimate the good that government can do, or to underestimate perhaps the role that government should play? Do you ever feel that there are ways in which folks can kind of see past the fact that government has a legitimate function? And, you know, if so, if government can help advance the common good, to what degree do you think that may or may not be the case?
Yeah, I think of maybe Dominique and I have a different view of conservatives, but I think of conservatives a lot as big government people, and that bothers me. Like, I do think conservatives love government. They just want government to work like the way they want it to work. My proposal is just like, as much as can be offloaded from government, we should do that, because we can trust ourselves more than we can trust a faceless bureaucracy. And we have the ability to, you know, and yeah, government does play a part. Like, you'll notice I didn't suggest government stop funding education. You know, I just suggested that perhaps the government give you control over that money yourself, so that you can go choose the school that is right for you, rather than have to wait for these politicians who don't necessarily have much care for what goes on in our communities on a day-to-day basis, have to wait for them to take action. It's just the red tape that is so frustrating. Government, of course, I mean, I'm not an anarchist, my goodness. Of course we need government. I like my
some anarchists.
I pay my taxes. I'm not a libertarian. You know, I am a conservative. I do believe that government has a place. I don't agree with a lot of my conservative brethren about the amount of government that needs to take place. And I certainly don't agree with people on the left about the amount of government that takes place. But, you know, the idea that, like, I guess this is what makes me uncomfortable when we've been having these social justice discussions or systemic racism discussions, because sometimes people are like, we need to tear everything down. Like, those are government haters too, right? And I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. We need these things. We need the police, right? The DMV serves its purpose. And I pay my taxes like most people in this country. But I think that's a legit question, John. And so I guess just to simplify my answer, absolutely. Like, the mechanism and the wheels of government are there. They turn slowly. And that's why I think it's always going to be a better and swifter approach to justice if we can take as much into our own hands as we can.
Okay. Well,
I think we agree on that, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a whole lot more there that would be fun to talk about. And my hope is that we can do this again. So let me just throw that out there. But like I said, I wanted to save a few minutes here for politics. And let me just say to you both very quickly. So at Braver Angels, we are going to be having a town hall community debate, what we call Braver Angels debate, coming up on September 3rd on the Trump administration and whether or not the policies of the Trump administration have or have not been beneficial to Black America. So we're going to have hundreds of folks from all colors, but particularly, of course, African Americans and folks who are visible within the community, having this discussion. And so I want to sort of get that going a little bit here at the end of this podcast. But I sort of want to ask this in a couple points. So, question one for each of you: what has the impact of the Trump administration been on Black America? All good, all bad? Is there a mix to the consequences there? And two, how much is the vision of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris an antidote to whatever the shortcomings of the Trump administration may be vis-a-vis Black America? Starting with Dominique. Dominique, how would you respond to that question? Trump been good or bad for Black America?
Well, I think Trump is Black America's nightmare. And I think it's a time-release nightmare where we will be seeing the impact of his destruction for generations to come. But I am a fair-minded person, so I can note one thing that he's done that was positive, which is the First Step program. I think, this is a rare area of bipartisan opportunity where we can look at dismantling the prison industrial complex. I think there's lots of people on the right that are now having thoughtful conversations about whether or not we over-incarcerate, which clearly we do, and the impact in particular on the African American and Latino communities. I applaud the First Step Act, and I applaud the president for making that happen to the extent that he did, along with the other partners that made that happen. I think when you talk about the impact of the Trump administration on Black America, there's the obvious things, the dismantling and undermining of the Affordable Care Act. When we know that African Americans have disproportionate lack of access to healthcare, and particularly during a pandemic when we are dying in droves, many without access to healthcare. The dismantling of the civil rights unit within the Department of Justice, that now being used for what I call reverse reparations, where he's going after Yale for supposedly discriminating against white people and Asian people as a way of disenfranchising Black and Latino people. So this is not just shutting down affirmative action. This is actually reverse reparations, where we are going to chip away at the tiny little things that have already been done to remedy 12 generations of African Americans who worked without pay in this country and have never been compensated for that. And so there's that. There's the judges. He's placed conservative judges throughout our nation, not just in the Supreme Court. That is going to have an impact for 10, 20 years, maybe more, in rulings that are not favorable to African Americans, Latinos, women, reproductive rights, the elderly. I think when you talk about the environment, the downgrading of the EPA, the withdrawal from international, global emergency responses. You're talking about something that has a negative impact on the African American community because of systemic racism, environmental injustice. We are disproportionately impacted, not just here in America, but in Africa, where the global emergency, the global warming emergency, is disproportionately and harshly impacting sub-Saharan Africans. And that's just not for Black people, though. That's for everybody. Because if we don't have a planet, every other talking point becomes irrelevant. And, our president is a climate denier. So, and then not to mention the pandemic response, which is a non-response. This is a great place, an ideal place where government should step in and create a national testing protocol, a national safety protocol. None of that has happened. And so as a result, Black people literally are dying every day. These are just a few of the impacts. I could go on and on. I know we don't have time for all that, but clearly the negative impact on us is tremendous.
Okay. And actually, so let's Kira, let's go to you here to get your take on Trump. And then in our final minutes, maybe we can circle back and get a take on Biden-Harris from each of you. But Kira, what is your evaluation of the Trump administration's record vis-a-vis Black America?
I always find this question a little strange to answer because it really depends on what you think is, like good for the Black community. Like Dominique said, okay, this first step thing is great. But I hate the idea that criminal justice reform is like the only thing that people relate with Black people. Like it's exclusive to Black, like we're the criminals, so we need the justice reform. Sometimes
we're unjustly convicted. That's why we need it.
Oh yeah, I get that, but I'm always like, well, we don't have to be like labeled as, this doesn't have to be labeled as Black legislation because it's got the word criminal on it, you know what I mean? But I get that. There's a lot, Dominique said a lot, and I feel like a lot of those points are debatable, like I could go in and I could say, you raise your eyes, Dominique, but we could have a debate on what we think some of the mechanisms here are, what I believe about global warming, or what I believe about, how we incarcerate stuff. I understand we don't have enough time, so I don't want to come at you for your points. Like, I hear everything that you said. I disagree with some of it. I disagree that some of it is relevant to the Black community at this point. But what I'll say about Trump is I don't know what the impact of him as a president, as a single human being, is on the Black community right now or will be in 10 to 20 years. But I do know that there are some things that he's doing that are going to open the doors unintentionally, if anything, for Black America. And there are some programs that he's working on right now that I really love and have been on the table for a long time. And I've been wishing that a president will come along and talk about these things. And one of those things is the legislation he's worked on with Senator Tim Scott on opportunity zones. I used to be a part of an opportunity zone back in Gary, Indiana. We worked really hard to get these things up and running in the community, but it's really hard. Going back, Dominique, to your point about where does government fit in here? It's hard to do that without government support. When you live in the hood, like Dominique said earlier, the tax base isn't there. So it's easy enough to say, oh, well, all we got to do is inspire young Black kids to be business owners and they'll grow up to be business owners. It's not that simple. If you don't have the mechanisms and the tools in place for kids to know that opportunity even exists, for kids to know that a business can be opened, not only that, there's a scholarship available for it. These are all things that I've longed to be a part of a federal platform, a federal level. So I think things like that, like opportunity zones, is a great thing. And then as a proponent and advocate for school choice for, most of my adult life, I love all of the school choice thoughts. The thing is that the president only has so much power. We talk a lot in terms of because we love presidential elections in America. The most influential politics is your local politics. And people ignore those. And that's why your local politicians can get away with so much weirdness, because most people are hyper-focused on DC. But really, your circle is where stuff happens. So as far as him as a single human being, there's some things he can't do. We have a constitution. We have states' rights. We have some things he's not allowed to do, and that's a good thing, So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is on Trump, circle back in 4 years. Let me see. Let me take a look.
Okay. Well, in that case, Kira, let me ask you if you have anything to say, therefore, on Biden and Joe Biden, now Kamala Harris, and of course, noting that Kamala Harris stands to be the first Black first Black and female vice president of the United States, should she be elected, and is the first person nominated as such. What do you feel about Biden and Harris's platform? Do they have things in a positive way to offer to the Black community, or are you more concerned than not?
I'm not concerned. This is how it works, right? The Democrats pick people and the Republicans pick people. I found Kamala's pick confusing just from a political analyst point of view, because usually you pick somebody who brings a state with you, but Biden's not going to need California. And I thought there might be some other stronger Black candidates as far as having like a region that they could bring with them. So I was kind of confused with her as a choice. Full disclosure, I'm not voting for Democrats this year. So I don't have a dog in the fight, I guess, so to speak, but my opinion, like, I think she's fine. I thought there were other candidates he might have wanted to go with and could have gone with that might have served the purpose. And then, of course, we're getting into the whole idea of just choosing someone based on what they look like. But that was the corner he chose to paint himself into early on. That's fine. I still believed that there were other, like if I was advising his campaign, I maybe would have told him to go with someone different just because you're going to get the votes from that region and you're not going to need California unless they've got some internal polling that I've never seen. But so as far as how she is, I don't think she's more progressive. I've seen a lot of conservatives really complaining about this is the most progressive candidate that we've ever, like, I don't see that. I think she's just like everybody else. I don't necessarily feel like she's a threat. I don't necessarily feel like she's a terrible choice for Biden. I just was confused by the choice. I thought strategically he might have gone with someone else. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out because I'm not quite sure yet.
Right. And Dominique, final moments here. A lot of folks, certainly on the left and more than a few libertarians too, look at Kamala Harris as being an advocate of precisely some of the criminal justice practices that were viewed as maybe problematic and in need of reform. From your vantage point, though, is what Biden-Harris represents in terms of policy and philosophy, does that stand to take America and the Black community in particular in the right direction? Or are you yourself more concerned than not with respect to the lineup on the ticket here?
I think Kamala Harris is a rock star, and that's what she brings with her. She brings America, not just California. She brings a Black America for many of us, not all of us, obviously not you, Kira. She brings, Indian America. She brings a lot of HBCUs and sororities and educated women and professional women and women who have had to break glass ceilings. I feel like this is Kamala Harris's destiny, to be honest with you. To say anyone say they don't have a dog in the fight is not true because that's who you are going against in November. And the fact of the matter is I'm a progressive, as I've said repeatedly. Was she my first choice? No. Is she an historic and excellent choice? Absolutely. People try to say she's a safe choice. A Black woman in America is never a safe choice. Joe Biden has done something brave. He has done something historic, and he has done something that elevates him. She makes him better. It's obvious from the moment she took the stage with him, there was energy, there was vibrance, there was focus. She's a sharp debater. Yes, she's a prosecutor. So she did what prosecutors do, which is prosecute. And yes, she is, as Kira said, not the most progressive. She is from a law enforcement background. That said, though, just as America has evolved, 6 months ago, very few supported Black Lives Matter. Recent polling shows up to 2/3 of Americans do. We're all allowed to evolve. I believe Kamala Harris has become more progressive. And I believe as we, as Americans, stay in these streets and stay involved in politics and keep pushing our line, what's best for the people, we will continue to see Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, even Donald Trump, whoever it is that's elected, move to the left, to the will of the people, just as we've seen the postmaster, bowing down to the people, to the elderly people who are depending on their medications from the post office, to the veterans who look for their checks and such. These are the things that happen when the people move, and the people are on the move right now. I don't think that stops. And I think that's propelling Kamala Harris in her politics. And I think it is going to propel any politician. Hopefully it's the Democrats that win in November. I don't think that's a given, but it's going to have to be pressure from the people that makes any political party do the right thing. And I think Kamala Harris is an excellent choice. Can't wait to see the vice presidential debate. And I think she is clearly more than qualified for the job. She's more qualified for the job of president than our current occupant of the White House. I think she's ready on day one, and I support her 100%.
Well, and she's also proven that she's willing to tell Joe Biden what she thinks, at least, as she demonstrated on the debate stage. And I imagine that she's willing to communicate that to President Trump as well. Lord knows he's going to give it back as good as he gets it. And so it's going to be quite a raucous election. But like you folks say, like each of you have said in one way or the other, the power is ultimately with the people. And within the context of Black America and so forth, I am just glad that we can have this conversation and show people that, because we have different philosophical starting points doesn't mean we're not fundamentally pulling in the same direction, right? Because we're brothers and sisters at the end of the day. And this country, this great, beautiful country of ours, is one that we want to remain and improve upon for our children, those who come after. So that's all from me, Dominique, Kira. Thank you both so much. I really hope that we can do this again. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Kira.
Yeah, you too, Dominique.
Absolutely. And so folks who are listening, if you feel the need to get involved, and I sure hope you do, check out our work at Braver Angels at braverangels.org. Become a member, like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And until next time, we are building a house united. See you soon.